everybody, welcome back for the last session of the day, before we have our reception afterwards. And we're continuing on our theme of the day. It's a pleasure to welcome Prof. Iliffe from the University of Oxford, and he's going to speak to us on Rewriting the System of the World, a digital edition of the Principia Mathematica. Thank you,
Rob. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm grateful to the speakers today for raising issues which I've tried to insert into this hastily rewriting of the system of the world. I'm going to talk about the advantages and limits of print editions of Newton's writings in the exact sciences. There is, as you've heard, no even moderately complete print digital edition of the Principia papers. But now there are, thanks to the Cambridge Digital Library, brilliant high-quality images that most people here will have seen. One of the things that has guided the work of the Newton Project, which I have co-directed with Scott for a very long time, 27 years, that's over a quarter of a century. One of the things we try to do, I think, is keep focusing on text transcription. When in doubt, instead of offering, because we're dealing with such scale, way beyond what Whiteside did or what anyone else has done working on parts of Newton's writings. We've got something like 12,400,000 of Newton's words online at the moment. We concentrate on producing text, TEI, encoded XML. I'll talk a little bit about the advantage of and the possibility of producing an absolutely comprehensive or, in my language, exhaustive edition of Newton's Principia-related writings. And then at the end, to a small extent based on some of the discussions we had, particularly in the last session, I'll talk about where we're going with editing and whether human editors are going to be overtaken partly or wholly by AI agents, and I'm not joking because it's not funny. So the Newton Project, this is pretty much how it looks at the moment. It's a non-profit organisation aimed at making a freely available digital resource available to whoever wants to look at it, who has access to good bandwidth and a decent interface. We've been going, as I said, for a fair amount of time. We started off working on the non-scientific papers for reasons I won't go into. And then about 16 years ago, I started to work with Grant Young in the Cambridge University Digital Library to start transcribing some of Newton's mathematical and science papers. We have done a great deal so far. We've transcribed pretty much all of Newton's theology. We've transcribed all of his Mint papers, which are here. There's about 1.8 million words on that, and there's extraordinary stuff. There's a wonderful map of London, which you can toggle between a modern Google map and an early 18th century map if you don't want to look at any of the text. But that's something, again, that we're very proud of. And one of the last things that remains to be done, perversely, is a rendition or a digital editing of the Principia papers. And I think there are between 7,500 and 8,000 pages of text in that. So that's considered very, very broadly. We have done, over the last 15 years, as I've said, we've produced what we might call a digital edition, although, of course, what a digital edition is remains to be seen, particularly given what's coming down the line. You'll have seen the picture of the waste book this morning. I think Scott used that image. This is, and Niccolo certainly spoke about it, it's an extraordinary text. It's Newton's stepfather's theological notebook with notes for sermons, and Newton fairly ruthlessly took it at a time when paper was reasonably expensive and did various things on it that we now take to be, in some ways, the foundations of modern mathematics and modern mechanics. So on the left-hand side, you have an image of the book itself, and on the right, there's an image of the first page. We were lucky quite early on to get a brilliant researcher called Daniele Cassisa, who was an expert in MathML, in LaTeX, and a very brilliant interpreter of Newton's writings, because he had to invent a lot of the renderings of this from scratch. So between 2010 and 2013, Daniele did half of all the mathematical transcriptions. So on the right-hand side, you can see, I think, about 10 lines down to find a heavy body's descent in any given time. And then above that is actually some writings of Barnabas Smith, Newton's stepfather, which we, as you'll see, we have also transcribed. This is how it looks if you go online. And I have to say, at the time we were working from a microfilm and stuff that's illegible 15 years ago is not illegible now. And one of the things we want to do is to remove those illeg things, because most of them are not illegible. But that's just a function of where we were 15 years ago. That's a rendering in MathML of what you've just seen. And it shows, so some of this is automated, some of this is actually Daniele's own work, tagging the document. And this is the level of intensity and work that was required 15 years ago by Daniele when he started. So yeah, that's the Newton portion of it. About 3 or 4 pages into the waste book, Newton listed a series of problems that historians of Newton's mathematics have seen as not exactly constitutive, but as guiding principles for many of the kind of research questions and problems that he engaged in over the next 2 to 3 years. And one of the things that you can do quite easily, I think, with the Newton Project materials is to find in Newton's waste book and also in some other writings, perhaps the mathematical notebook, areas where Newton has actually tried to investigate some of these problems at greater length. So if this works, I'll use the, this is the rendering. To find tangents to any crooked lines, whether geometrical or mechanical, it's relatively easy to find this, which is a date which probably Niccolo thinks is added later on, but it's something for further research. But this is a very early effort, not just to think conceptually, but also to structure a tract or an argument in a particular form. And we render it on the Newton Project like that. Again, there's a vast amount of work that has gone into rendering, just transcribing that particular page. Other questions, so this is the second part of the problems that Newton raised to determine maxima and minima in an equation which has more than X amount of unknown quantities. And there we have a method for finding theorems concerning questions de maximi set et minimis. And again, there's a date on the side. So these things were made available in about 12, 13 years ago. And they're a very important part of the Newton Project output. So this is our the way that we've rendered it online. And the bit that was Barnabas Smith, we've also transcribed. So again, this is the notes that Barnabas Smith had, which again, if you're interested, you can find on the Newton Project website. Newton evidently didn't spend much time reading them. We've also got the October 1666 tract on resolving problems by motion, and I'll talk a bit later about the issues to do with Newton's kinematics, so I won't say very much, and Niccolo knows more than I do, but there are interesting possibilities of rendering the way Newton thinks in a kind of filmic way, and not just in some kind of static diagrammatic form. But we have this is what you would see in Cambridge Digital Library. We have the transcript, a side-by-side searchable transcription nested next to the image. And of course that itself takes a lot of work to transform what we have transcribed into something where you've got a line-by-line connection with the image on the left-hand side. This is another book. This is additional manuscripts for 1000, which is the so-called mathematical notebook. Again, this is not as significant as the Waste book. There's a bundle of different projects and notes in it. Here's one, a method whereby to find the areas of those lines that can be squared. On the left, we've got notes from Viette. And we've got again, this is from Cambridge Digital Library, a rendering, which makes all this searchable. And all of the images are also available in a small form if you use mouse over. Here's a version of Newton's De Quadratura Curvarum from the early 1690s. This is actually in the Macclesfield collection. And again, we have rendered this, or rather the Cambridge Digital Library's rendered this on the right-hand side. So we haven't actually transcribed the longer version yet, but we will do very soon. It's obviously one of Newton's most famous and important works on integration, following 3 or 4 years after the publication of the Principia Mathematica, responding to Leibniz and also responding to David Gregory, telling Gregory that Newton is no smatterer in mathematics. Here's another work which is from the priority dispute papers. So anyone who wants to find out anything that Newton wrote about the priority dispute with Leibniz, we have transcribed all of those plus the relevant materials in the Macclesfield papers. That's a very substantial tranche of papers. It's a giant data set in its own right. Rob Raleigh transcribed that over 2.5 years, and we're very grateful to him for doing that. It's a technically recondite set of texts, and it requires somebody with wide-ranging expertise to be able to render that into the form that you see on the right-hand side. So we've already done work on mathematics. There are mathematical texts there, but we're primarily interested today in talking about the Principia Mathematica. And as I said, I counted these quite recently. There's about 7,500 pages that one could reasonably say in the Cambridge Digital Library collection that are relevant to the development and refinement of the Principia over just over 4 decades, so from roughly 1684, assuming that that's the start, to whatever he was, whatever contribution he made to the 3rd edition of 1726. This is we have online, and I'll show you one small image, but we have online a transcription of all 3 editions of the Principia Mathematica. This is something that we haven't yet done an edition of, slightly perversely perhaps, but this is Andrew Mott's 1729, highly influential, within Britain at least, translation of the Pemberton 1726 edition. On the left-hand side, we have the Sir and Jacquier first book, to the Thomas Primus from 1739. that came out, the entire translation of the Principia came out over 3 years between 1739 and 1742. On the right-hand side, we've got the first printed rendering of the Principia into French, 1759, 10 years, of course, after she died, by Madame du Châtelet. There are a whole series of editions with different uses and functions throughout the late 18th and 19th centuries. Many of these editions were used for teaching purposes, particularly in the British Isles. This one is a work on the left-hand side. It's the Glaswegian 1822 edition by Wright of the Le Sueur and Jacquier edition. Wright was somebody who taught at Cambridge and at Glasgow, a Cambridge wrangler who was an expert and a brilliant writer, teacher of students, and himself responsible to a certain degree in transforming mathematics in Cambridge in the 1810s. On the right-hand side, there's the first American, so-called American edition of Newton's Principia by Chittenden, which is essentially a reproduction of Mott 1729, but it's got an amazing introduction by Chittenden, which I have to confess I hadn't looked at until quite recently, but it's worth reproducing in its own right. Moving into the early 20th century, the Swiss-American mathematician Florian Cajori produced who was a mathematics teacher in Colorado for most of his life, produced this famous and much used edition, the Mott-Cajori edition, as it's called, in 1934, 3 years after he died. And this was really the kind of go-to English edition until this edition on the left-hand side by Bernard Cohen and Witzmann, a translation which, again, Niccolo has spoken about, many other people have commented on. There are many different ways in which one can translate the Principia. Chandrasekhar had one view, Cohen and Whitman another view, and then more recently on the other side, on the right-hand side, you can see Charles Leadham Green from St Mary's in London, Queen Mary, sorry, published this edition, I think 2 years ago. And Leadham Green corresponded a lot with Niccolo and myself, and probably with Scott. He wanted to do something that had greater appeal to modern mathematicians, rather than the kind of clunky and occasionally over-literal rendition that Bernard Cohen and Anne Whitman did. I'm sure it was Anne Whitman who did most of the work, assisted by Julia Budens. I'd love to know what Julia did. So we have continuing interest in editions of the Principia. Now, the interesting issue with the Cohen work, which first appeared from University of California Press in 1999, is that it's the legacy of a project that goes back to the middle of the 1950s, a project that he conceived with the great Ukrainian, Russian, French scientist, historian of science, Alexandre Koyré. And it was part of a very substantial effort by Cohen and Koyré to produce a comprehensive edition of the Principia papers. Koyré died in 1964, and his participation in the Cohen-Koyré project came to an end. But Cohen battled on to produce a variorum edition, which is credited to both Cohen and Koyré, in 1972. And so you can see that on the right-hand side in 2 volumes. This is using the 1726 third edition as the default edition with variants listed in footnotes. And as far as I know, people haven't complained about the precision and rigor of the work they did. There may have been complaints about what the purpose and function and audience for such an edition was. But in its own terms, it was a perfect example of a print culture edition of one of the foundational texts in modern science, if not the major, most significant foundational text in modern science. Cohen wrote what I think is a very interesting, to me anyway, I'm one of his, part of his audience of 5. He wrote a very interesting book on the left-hand side in 1971, which contains some of the commentary which he and the ghostly Querret denied to the Variorum edition, and it remains the most significant introduction to the 3 books of the Principia. And in that book, Cohen makes some very interesting musings about the nature of a print edition, and I think they're extremely significant with respect to the work we've been doing over the last 30 years to try and produce what might be called a digital edition of Newton's writings. Cohen made, speaking from the heart, in the introduction, Cohen noted, and I think with respect to the work that Whiteside done, he's commenting on Tom Whiteside's own remarks in the first edition, in the first volume of the Mathematical Papers, on the notion of significance. There's a wonderful sentence I was talking to Niccolo about last night, where Whiteside said that he chose those texts he deemed to be of greatest significance, and they were the ones that captured his interest most intensely. So that is those are the kind of sovereign, if you like, editorial principles. I'm sure Whiteside had that there are obvious, self-evidently important texts, but naturally Whiteside, who had immersed himself in that resource, chose to exclude various texts that he took to be unimportant and chose to include those that excited him. Cohen talks at length, and I think very interestingly, about the dangers of including of an editor who's obviously in some kind of, let's call it presidential or monarchical position in terms of what he or she gives to his readers or her readers. Shifting fashions in scholarship, and he was noting shifting fashions of scholarship in the late 60s and early 70s, made it foolhardy for one editor to exclude allegedly insignificant readings, leaving future generations to wonder what significant variant readings had been omitted. And I would add, although he doesn't say this, that there is a strange, spooky entanglement with print editions, which is that they had, in a sense, the inverse effect of what they were designed to achieve, which is that they made much more interesting and significant in terms of scholarly credibility what was not published in that edition. So as a result of, you can see this in editions all over the place, scholars quite naturally start going to libraries to find out what is not in the editions, and they are the things that they take to be more interesting than what's included in a print edition, which of course makes the function of a print edition quite interesting. Regarding his and Querret's 1972 Variorum edition, Cohen noted that they had aimed for, if you like, a strongly circumscribed completeness. They only, instead of picking out readings from the Portsmouth collection, so the giant ocean of data that is related to the Principia, which I'll go on to in a minute. Instead of including that, they made the rigorous decision to include almost none of it. and to leave some bits to go into the introduction to the Principia and other bits to be unpublished. They'd sought to produce a publication that would stand the test of time, Cohen said, and scholars would not need constant recourse to the originals to see what Cohen and Koyré had omitted. Cohen noted that he and Koyré had argued at length and wanted to include in their edition the most relevant selections from the thousands of folios of Principia-related writings in Cambridge. They wanted to include relevant selections, that's his phrase, from the papers and correspondence of Gregory, Halley, Fatio, Roger Coates, and Pemberton. And although he didn't say it, one might, of course, add Leibniz, Huygens, and all of the Bernoullis. They're all commenting on Newton in some sense. In the end, Cohen said they felt unable to justify selecting any of these materials at all. Firstly, because they might not be able to articulate a coherent selection policy. That means they were not able to articulate a coherent selection policy. And secondly, because even if they could, their criteria were likely, that means inevitably, to be rejected by other scholars. If he and Koyré, Cohen wrote, chose to select some texts at the expense of others, the reader would at once ask himself what other manuscript material there might be on these and on similar topics, which we had not selected for inclusion in the apparatus criticus. Such an effect differs greatly from the aim of completeness we expected a critical edition to have. We were also mindful that foci of scholarly interest change from time to time, that our concerns would be different not only from those of some contemporaries, but certainly from those that would be current, perhaps as soon as a decade or so hence. We might very well omit just those topics that would be of primary scholarly concern to others, now and in the future, wholly apart from our disregard, I think this is very important, wholly apart from our disregard for grammatical constructions or certain computations or collections of data. So what he says there is that they would rule out from the very beginning any of the kind of tedious hundreds of pages of calculations and notes that presumably many of the people in the room are interested in. An ambitiously comprehensive edition would be beyond our capacities as editors. To transcribe every word in a print edition, Cohen went on, the writings would have to be transcribed or photocopied, and then the transcriptions cut up so that each page or paragraph or line or jotting could be classified according to the page and line of the Principia to which it pertains. Such an undertaking would require an edition of 2,000 to 4,000 pages and might take 12 scholars more than 12 years to complete. I'm not sure why 12 is the key. I mean, its size and complexity would render it unusable for anyone beyond a narrow band of specialists. Most of the material would be uninteresting and of questionable value, even to Newton specialists. The costs, and this is a key thing, he talks at length about this, the costs of what he termed an edition of absolute completeness would be prohibitive. An edition of all the documents connected to the writing of the Principia was not likely to be realized in any world that Cohen could imagine. Those are his words. However, with the emergence of various technologies and infrastructures in the 1990s and in the 2000s, and indeed more recently, we can now do what Cohen thought was impossible. And the materials we want to look at are these, and I'll just spend a few minutes going through stuff that you probably know very well. On the left-hand side is the first example of a proto-Principia text composed in approximately November 1684. The background is presumably well known. It's designed to be sent to Edmund Halley in the Royal Society, De Motu Corporum Ingirum, with definitions. So there's definitions and then theorems. And on the right-hand side, that's Halley's copy, still in the Portsmouth papers, in the core Principia papers, which are additional manuscripts 3965. They're designated as the core Principia-related materials. So all of these things are still in the core materials. On the left-hand side, we have what most scholars take to be a revise of about February 1685, De motu sphaericorum corporum in fluidis. And on the right-hand side, there is a further revise in the writings of Humphrey Newton, his amanuensis, and Scott says possibly a distant relation, who knows. And we know at that stage, so by this time, Humphrey has come to work in partnership or in some kind of complex partnership with Newton. And I think one of the things we would like to do over the next few years is to identify exactly what Humphrey did. I think we can date pretty much some of the things he did with great accuracy. And we can work out, and I can't remember if Scott mentioned this morning, we can work out whether Humphrey is listening to Newton dictating or whether he is copying visually a text from something else, because we know, I think with certainty, that occasionally Newton is dictating something, because Humphrey writes down something that he's misheard, or rather that he's heard and not understood. This is at a time in the fall of 1685, when Newton had completed a draft which doesn't yet have any reference to universal gravitation. He's completed a two-book object, Liber Primus, Liber Secundus. This is the draft Liber Primus, which Newton deposited as his university lectures for October 1684. You can see that on the right-hand side. I think that is a genuine date. And then this is the Liber Secundus, which is the draft of what became Book 3 of the Principia. The Liber Primus was broken up into two books when the work finally appeared in the summer of 1687. As I said, we have a transcription. So for searching, for searching capacity, if nothing else, if you want to search through the Principia and find changes, you can do that because they're available on the Newton project. This is the text that Newton sent to London to Joseph Streeter. This is the text Newton sent to be printed. This is also available via Cambridge, although the original's in the Royal Society. This is fairly momentous, I think, because you can see, in a sense, De motu corporum becoming the mathematical principles of natural philosophy on the title. It's actually in Humphrey Newton's hand. It's very close to the version that was printed in 1687, but there are Newton additions and deletions in that text. On the left-hand side from Trinity College, we have Newton's own personal copy of his Principia. On the right-hand side, this is the page of definitions from his own interleaved copy, which is in Cambridge University Library. Newton had a number, 5 or 6 books that he used as working objects to make changes and to incorporate works that had come from, mainly from his allies, but also he's responding probably to those people who would like to see some harm come to him. This is the interleaf, which I've just mentioned, with, as you know, with Samuel Pepys, the president of the Royal Society, with his name given. Well, it's exactly the same size as this Newton character from Trinity College, Cambridge. On the right-hand side, in the interleaf, you can see Newton getting upset with Flamsteed, and he's cut him out. That's the best way to get back at your enemies, is to consign them to oblivion, and that's what he's trying to do with Flamsteed, but Flamsteed's hard to kill. On this one, this is I always like this juxtaposition. On the left-hand side, you've got the third law from Newton's own interleaf, Newton's own Trinity College copy, where you can see that he wants to get rid of, to every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. And then on the right-hand side, from the interleaf, he's doing exactly the same. He doesn't like that phrase for some reason, but we know that it ends up in his final works. This is from the interleaf copy of the second edition, 1713. This is the Kepler inertia effort. An extraordinary text, marginal annotation, where he wants to make it clear that his notion of inertia is different from Kepler's, because for Kepler, inertia is the tendency for any body to come to a rest after a given period of time. And Newton, of course, can't have any truck with that, but it's extraordinary that he feels he has to include something like that in it. This is a copy of the final edition of Newton's career, the 1726 edition. And this is a draft of Rule 4, which was added. He put 3 rules of reasoning into the second edition of 1713. And this is the 4th rule, which finally made its way into the Principia in the form you have at the bottom in the English Mott translation. So, as I said, we have begun to transcribe some of 3965 using transcribers. I don't have time to talk at length about that, but that's something that we are trialing, thanks to Yvonne, who is there. She's doing all the work. We are also looking to transcribe, as part of the Principia Papers project, any of the mathematical texts that we haven't yet transcribed. So this is one, I think in one of Niccolò's works, he says it's circa 1681. I'm not sure if you can give him a month, but Geometria Curvilinear.
You're referring to the date.
The date,
it's
yeah.
very difficult.
It's difficult. No, I was being facetious. I mean, it's fantastic that you can date it to something like that. And then the great work, Geometria, which I think is approximately 1692 to 3, but maybe not. 3 books on geometry, which again is something for researchers who want to see how Newton's form of demonstration, his writing style, compares with similar efforts in theology, or in the Principia, or in optics. The availability of all of these objects in a digital data set is hopefully something that is extremely helpful. We want to include letters. This is a letter from Roger Coates. It's the 15th of April, 1710, in regard to the second edition. And you can see Coates is very confident that the second edition is about to appear. And it won't appear for some time, partly because Newton is master of the mint, and the people at the trial of the Picts, which is a trial to test the quality of his gold, have discovered that the gold that Newton is overseeing the production of is not as good as the gold that was produced 3 years earlier. So what Newton has to do throughout quite a lot of 1710 is to show that the gold in 1710 was artificially pure. So it was too pure, and therefore shouldn't act as a comparator for the stuff in 1710. But that's what he's really good at. Back of the Trinity notebook. This is great because these are notes on the Trinity copy of the Principia. These are notes on errata, and it raises the issue of what also we want to include, which are notes and criticisms from Fatio, from David Gregory, from his enemies, and so on and so forth. A bundle, a raft of all these, which Niccolò has very kindly offered to pay for. But this is something that we can do. That the logic of production is that if we can't do it right now, we can do it in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. We get the base of text, and then we don't have to undo that text because we have a robust way of representing text. and then we can do stuff if we haven't got the funding, which I hope we do get in some point. If we haven't got the funding, then we will go back and do this stuff later. Let me go on. Yeah, so I haven't got too much time. It was great that David raised the issue of e-scriptorium and transcribus. The transcribus people have been, I think, very helpful and generous in trying to get us to use AI-enhanced or AI-powered handwriting recognition software to help transcribe some of Newton's materials. I mean, what the previous session raised in terms of gain, efficiency, and so on, I think is something we have been trying to work out. You know, although we don't have a counterfactual of what would have happened if we hadn't transcribed it using transcribus, but we engage in front loading. So the training of the tool takes a long time. But once the tool is trained, providing that we can retain ownership and it's not taken from us, then in principle, because Newton's handwriting is relatively similar across the board, we can use this tool to aid in the transcription of other text. So a lot of that work with this AI-powered software is front-loaded, and we haven't yet worked out when that front-loading stops. So digital editorial work, the work we've been doing recently and of course over the last 20 odd years, we aim for completeness. We can leverage scale in a way that Cohen couldn't. It's searchable and browsable. It's extensible. You can keep adding to it. It's interoperable. We want to work with the Leibniz people, the Bernoulli people, the Euler people. And we have images, and I will come back onto the significance of the existence of these extraordinary images online. The logic of production I've described, but it's an infinite, unending process at one level, because you can always add to this. But we are aiming to transcribe the core Principia materials. I leave that fairly loose, but all of the Principia-related materials in Cambridge University Library by the end of 2027, and that's because Newton died in 1727. And it's a useful anniversary for us. With respect to what Scott spoke about this morning, and I'll just mention this again later on, one of the things that I've always been interested in is what can be done remotely in a good digital edition, and what has to be done, presumably by a human being working in situ in the archives. We are moving into a world where there is collaboration between expert and less expert transcribers, and between humans and non-humans. We are, and have been for many years, collaborating with experts in programming, digital humanities, and in AI. So yeah, sorry, I'm going to jump through transcribers and go on to a conclusion. And in the spirit of what Newton did at the start, I had the hubris to attempt to imitate Newton. I'm going to raise some problems and issues that are both specific to Newton, the Principia project, but also more general in terms of human-computer interaction in the next 10, 20 years. To begin with, the availability of such an edition, and I call it an edition for the sake of argument, it will allow scholars to see in much better detail, much more quickly, and in a different way, the development and refinement of core Newtonian concepts that he worked on for over 4 decades. It will also, and I think this ties in with a lot of the work that people like Simon Schaffer have done, and others on Newton's embeddedness in a global world of data collection. It will allow us to see much better and much more quickly than we have done before how Newton garnered evidence, produced evidence from all over the world, both locally on his tabletop, but also across the Earth, and also, of course, across the visible heavens. I have for some time been very interested in editing and de-editing. When we edited the Newton theological papers, there was no print edition for us to undo or unravel. That's not the case with some of these materials. We are, in a sense, knowingly going out to historicize, that is to render as an historical object, the editorial work that has been done by people like Tom Whiteside and Bernard Cohen and so on and so forth. We are, in a sense, taking their stuff seriously, but we're going through what they're doing into the core materials, and that raises issues that have been about how we deal with fundamentally humanist scholarship. Humanist scholarship emerged when print editions came into being, and you cited, so citation credibility emerged through having editions that were available to many, many people across Europe, and you could cite page number and volume and authorship. And that's not the case with what we've got. It's not the case that we're not editing it, so I'm throwing in some negative. We are editing this, but we don't stand to the objects that we're editing in the same way that humanist authors and editors stand to the objects that they produce. What's the status of edited objects that lack the physical and bibliographic printed arrangement of a standard academic object? How do we cite them? I think objects don't exist unless they can be cited. What are the relative expectations of editorial and analytic work in a comprehensive digital edition? So how far is an editor supposed to go? What are we supposed to do beyond providing text to various people? I mean, that emerges in the case, what are our moral, professional obligations? Do we provide AI tools? Do we provide APIs? Do we provide commentary? What do we do? Do we provide ways, that is, of allowing historians, giving them a guide, as it were, through a kind of museological, four-dimensional museological terrain? It's something like going into a museum where you can jump from one side of the museum to the other, because that's what this is like. What is the editor's role in this new world? To what extent are we obliged or invited to add notes or guides in the way Whiteside did? What is the obligation of the editor, and what should we expect the researcher, historian to do? To what extent, carrying on this thought, should we render Newton's Baroque form of notation, Baroque with respect to what's going on in continental Europe? To what extent should we render this either automatically or by hand into modern mathematical notation? Can we do that? Should we do that? I think yes, we should. Can we turn some of his kinematic forms of representation of crookedness or of curvature in a kind of filmic way? That would be interesting, and it would be important for schools. And it again throws up clearly, then perhaps otherwise, the differences between Newton's way of thinking and Leibniz's way of thinking and his followers. I've already mentioned the issue of how much work can or should be done remotely, and how much work, given a properly produced digital edition, how much work can be done remotely, and how much work has to be done by a human being in the university archive. With the images that we have at our disposal, what is the status of the transcriptions? Because with images, transcriptions take on a different status. They're no longer ends in themselves, but they're simply data sets that allow search mechanisms to search. And it raises the key issue, which people were talking about at tea, about what's good enough. The Newton Project has mistakes. We have transcription errors. Are they important? I wonder how important they are. Should we aim at a kind of Rolls-Royce accurate rendition of everything? Is that something that is worth, thinking of Cohen, is that worth the time and expense of the modern world? I would actually say no. We need to agree on what is good enough, but it's not going to be something that is meticulous. And in any case, if people get upset, they can correct it themselves. That's the beauty of the online edition. With training, for example, I mean, maybe the next generation of AI will be able to do things on the fly without the need for any text, without the need for any transcription at all. The AI will recognize patterns on the fly. It will grasp what various words are. It won't need those transcriptions that we've just spent 30 years producing. Sorry. How can the use of AI or other computing science tools aid in the transcription, editing, and analysis of recondite data sets? It's not just about transcription, it's about editing. Some of the stuff I've seen, and we have to imagine, given the limited resources of the Earth, notwithstanding, that AI will continue to improve in various ways. I think that the AI can do various editing roles quite well, because that kind of pattern recognition is what a lot of LLM stuff is designed to do. And we can say that it's going to help us. We can say that it will function as an aid, but I am interested, as I say at the bottom, what the new forms of relationship will be between, the new social relations will be between human and non-human actors. I mean, are we really using these things as aids, or is it the case that these AI agents are becoming dominant, and that our key role as humanists is simply to tweak the tool to make it better? What about the human in the loop? Where within this three-dimensional loop, as it were, is the human going to have to be? Will we always need an expert? Will it always be the case that we need an expert to correct the AI tool? And finally, again, this was discussed over tea. It's something that I think is very dangerous, and we have to think about it right now, because various areas of scholarship are under threat of being de-skilled or removed. To what extent are humanists working in ways that we've understood for many decades, condemned to be computer literate amanuenses, that is to say, early 21st century versions of Humphrey Newton? That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating. And yeah, if we run out of questions, you've got 25 questions that you've raised for yourself. But I don't think we will, because I can already see hands going up. Let's have Troy and then Ursula.
So it's a question about I suppose the amount of effort that goes into a project like this, which is not at all a criticism of the project, but what do you think is the generalizability here? Do you think you'd be able to take a lot of the mechanisms that you spent a lot of time and energy building up and apply them to a different corpus?
Yeah.
And if not, do we have to think about opportunity cost?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we started off, right from the beginning, when I applied for a grant application in 1999, we were having to justify working on a dead white European male, and concentrating those resources in that area. And my point there was that what we're doing is generalizable, and I think that what we've done at the very least is provide. So at the very least, we provided an inspiration for other people to do digital editions of projects. So it was a proof of principle, and we showed that it can be done. We showed that it's better than a print edition. A lot of the people who worked on the Newton project have gone off to become major players in other digital editions. So that there are definite ways where the kind of work we've done and the work that we're doing, I hope, will be of use to other people. I can't say any more than that. There's obviously lots of people working on e-scriptorium and transcribers.
Ursula?
I'll stand up because I'm right at the back. Yes, great talk, Rob. So I was particularly struck by your last two slides because in my, well, I'm retired, but the thing I'm really supposed to work on, or used to work on, was computers doing mathematical proof. And a lot of the conversations happening in that world, as we ask questions like, can AI do mathematics, that kind of stuff, they have resonance with what you're talking about. But actually, what's interesting is you're producing a humanist perspective that it's much harder to get the mathematical community to engage with because their conversations tend to be sort of very operational. Will it do this or will it do that? Or can it do really hard sums and things like that? But one of the questions that does arise is if what you imagine is that computers are just now producing vast slugs of mathematics. You know, you don't need all those clever guys in that math building over there. You've just got gigabytes and gigabytes of computer-produced math. Is what do you do with it, and where does human taste and discretion come into it? How do you decide what the questions are that it's worth a human asking about this now digitally created body of either Newton material or modern hard sums?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I think that certain forms of human activity within scholarship will be removed, but at the sort of mid to high end, humanist scholars will have to be on their toes, asking new questions, and seeing the data in a different way. I mean, there is a tendency, as you yourself have just shown, of agentizing or personalizing a lot of these tools. And I think it's going to be increasingly difficult to avoid doing that in the future. But I mean, I'm wary of not talking about the future as if it's quite imminent, because I think things are changing very quickly. And you can see with e-scriptorium and elsewhere, people like us are embracing some of this stuff because at least it offers financial efficiency. In a world where there's the environmental issues which we understand, but in terms of financial limits, if for example transcribers gave us over a period of time, so I think it's all about a period of time because you front load the training. You train the tool just like you train people over 30 years, but you train the tool. And I think in the short term, the gain is small. Medium term, the gain will be something, but then over a time, let's call it X, between medium and long term, I think we might get a gain of 50%. I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there. But if that's the case, then we should use, we should use the tools. And because we won't get funded unless we're showing that we're doing what we can to make gains in efficiency. But we're involved in testing the tools right now, so we don't know.
No, I wasn't saying don't use the tools.
Yeah.
I was saying, what do you do with all that this new form of representation, if you like, of the body of Newton's work, or this new form of representation of vast quantities of mathematics? Where does the human come in and say, right, what research questions are we going to ask now? Now we've got all these tools. Now we've got all this.
Well, look, I mean, non-facetiously, in 5 years' time, there will be non-human agents trying to write papers.
Oh, there are.
Well, they do it in your world, but I mean, I can't see.
They're doing it already.
They do it.
Papers
I know.
for spam conferences.
No, yes, I mean, there's all sorts of talk about non-human authorship and so on and so forth. But what's happening in the STEM world, I don't think we should be complacent about it not happening in 5 to 10 years' time. And of course, there's issues of plagiarism and authorship and so on, which are obvious. Everyone in the room knows that these are very, very difficult problems.
Final question, I think, from here, yeah?
Your comparisons, Rob, are very interesting because it seems to me that Cohen and Poiret actually produced not Cohen's introduction, but Principia edition. What was even at the time an unusable and unnecessary book. And you can see that to a very large extent in the way in which that book appears in people's referencing. So everybody uses Cohen's introduction. Very few people actually use extensively the Variorum edition, because a Variorum edition doesn't substitute actually for having the three texts in front of you, which is easy to do. But you can answer some of the questions that we've just heard by thinking about some of the answers to the questions you posed at the end. We can already show how much Newton scholarship has been generated by remote use of an archive that has been presented visually, but which can be searched using textual tools based on transcription. And there is a very optimistic story that you can tell about that, which isn't quite as, and which you could tell about it going forward as well. And there it seemed to me that by setting up the dichotomy with what I actually think is not is a perfectly good piece of scholarship, but not a successful edition, you've ended up by coming, strangely, to a much more pessimistic claim about what digital editions can do for humanities scholarship, much more pessimistic than David's claims. So,
I didn't mean to be completely pessimistic. I mean, what I'm saying is that we will have to work hard. We have to be on our toes as humans to avoid rendering ourselves pointless. In terms of, for a certain, we have to think about audiences. There's a certain subset of people of whom you're one, there are two or three in the room, but a very small set of people who needs to work on the materials. And there, one can see this ideal, wonderful harmony between, you have a laptop out, you've got the Newton materials right there, and you're doing this work. That's great. But that's a small subset of people who can do that. The question is, there are many different types of people. I mean, again, I skipped over one slide about what happens to transcription experts, partly because we discussed it in a previous session. But the democratization that's possible through using transcribers, which is a good thing, is also a bad thing, because it may well render, but it doesn't have to, render experts redundant. I mean, I think it will, my view is that we don't need, at one level, we don't need elite experts who are going to check every dot and T and so on and so forth, because it's a nice luxury. But I think at the scale that we deal with things, we don't, they cost too much. That degree of expertise is probably too costly. I hate to say that, but that's the real world. Would you rather have a million?
You can't believe that in a world which is infinitely richer than the world which has generated that expertise, that the expertise is redundant because it's costly. You can believe it's redundant because the world distributes value differently, and you can agree with that distribution of value. But it can't. It's not just cost.
But the real world is, from experience, do we hire a brilliant researcher at a very high salary level, which is great, for 3 years, who will produce 500,000 words? Or do we hire 3 people or 2.5 people who can produce good enough transcriptions using transcribers of 5 to 7 times as much material? Those are difficult decisions. I don't want our colleagues to be made redundant. I'm trying to describe what I see as a kind of historical flow. It's not inevitable, but we are faced with difficult choices. When faced with those choices, you have to work out, so it's that logic of production, what do you do first? If it's the case that later on down the line, then experts can come in and really produce a Rolls Royce, that's great. But for the moment, we would have to do that. So it's a kind of logic of production.
Oh, for production,
issue
sure,
as well.
but the conclusion from that you're making expertise redundant.
No, but the other thing, which I did want to, is cyber security, because the Newton project went down for 5 weeks. And I'm very well aware that the digital, and Will Paul just published a book recently where he said this shows the benefits of print over digital. The benefit of print over digital is absolutely clear. It is not going to go up in a puff of smoke. It might go up in flames, but then there will be other copies. if you're in Altadena. But there will be other copies of the same text, and if the material thing goes up in flames, then hopefully there's some kind of digital copy that will sustain it. But I'm not complacent about this thing lasting, and that's why we have to work with Hugh and others to create a system where 4 or 5 groups manage these, so that if one of them goes down, there's another thing somewhere else. But we have to think very carefully about that, because the Newton project did go down, and that was incredibly embarrassing for me. And what can I say? It was not great for my institution. But we had cyber intruders all over the place.
Okay, we have to stop there. I'm terrible chairing because it's 6 minutes into our reception time. But let's thank all speakers.